Montana Territory, August 1876. The wagon will cracked clean through just as the sun dipped behind the Bitterroot Mountains, and Theodora Granger dropped to her knees in the dust. One hand braced on the splintered wood, the other shielding her son's eyes from the flying grit. She had nothing left to give that day, not even tears. "Stay close," she said to her children, voice dry like the land around them. "We will figure this out." Seth, all of 9 years old, nodded and pulled his younger sister behind him. Susanna was 6, her cheeks dirty, her feet bare, her tiny arms tight around the ragged cloth doll she had clung to since Kansas. They had been walking for 2 days since the last town turned them away. No money, no husband, no land deed, just a tired woman and 2 children, asking for shelter. Theodora had learned quick that, in this part of the world, that was not enough. She stood again slowly, straightening her spine though every bone in her body protested. Her dress was worn thin, the hem frayed and caked in dust. She had sold her wedding band for a sack of beans 3 weeks ago, and the boots she wore had once belonged to her late husband. They still carried the shape of his feet. The land stretched out in every direction, golden grass, rust-colored hills, and not a soul in sight, until a horse's hoofbeats echoed through the quiet. She turned fast, putting herself between her children and the sound. A man rode up over the rise, hat low over his brow, a rifle slung across his back. His horse, a tall dapple gray, moved easy under him like they had been riding together for years. He pulled up when he saw them. His eyes swept over the broken wagon, the children, the woman standing like she had something left to protect. "You all right?" he asked, voice deep, calm. Theodora didn't answer right away. She studied him. Dusty boots, worn coat, sun-brown skin. He looked to be about 30. His jaw was unshaven, his hair dark and curling slightly at the ends where it met his neck. He did not look cruel, but she had learned not to trust how a man looked. She lifted her chin. "We are not looking for trouble. I did not say you were." He dismounted, careful, like he did not want to startle her. Seth stepped forward. "Our will broke. We were trying to make it to Missoula." The man gave the boy a nod. "That's still a good 50 miles. You folks walking?" Theodora swallowed. "We were hoping to find work." He looked at the wagon again. "This yours?" It was. Her voice held. "My husband died in Kansas. We left with what we could carry." He looked at her for a long moment, then down at the girl peeking out from behind her brother. "You got names?" "Seth and Susanna," Theodora said. "I am Theodora Granger." He took off his hat, brushing the dust from the brim. "Landon Hale. I have a ranch about 2 miles east. Nothing fancy, but there is water. Shelter. You are welcome to come." Theodora hesitated. "Why?" He blinked. "Because you are stuck in the middle of nowhere with 2 children and a busted wagon. That good enough?" She stared at him, weighing the risk. Seth turned to her. "Mama, please." She nodded once. "We will come." Landon's ranch sat in a small hollow between 2 low ridges. The house was plain but sturdy, a barn and corral nearby, a spring bubbling behind the back fence. He led them inside and gave them water first, then bread and dried apples. Theodora tried not to wolf it down, but her hands shook. "You sure you do not want more?" he asked, watching her carefully. "I will save it for the children. They already ate." She looked up then, really looked. "Why are you doing this?" He leaned on the table, arms crossed. "My mother raised 5 kids alone after my father died. Folks helped her. I reckon this is my turn." Theodora sat straighter. "We do not take charity." He smiled faintly. "Then call it a trade. I need help fixing fences. You need a roof." She nodded, tight. "I can cook, clean, mend. The children help when they can." He looked at her again, his eyes softer now. You came all this way alone? I had to. My husband's people wanted nothing to do with us once he passed. We had nowhere else. Landon's gaze lingered on her face. You did all that for them? I would walk to the edge of the world for them. He said nothing for a while. Then, low and honest, that is everything I ever wanted. She blinked, unsure she had heard right. But he stood then, clearing his throat. You all can take the upstairs room. It's small, but it is clean. That night, Theodora sat on the little bed, brushing tangled knots from Susanna's hair, while Seth slept curled on a blanket on the floor. The window was open, letting in the cool night air and the distant sound of frogs near the spring. She looked around the room. The quilts were worn but clean. The walls smelled of pine. There was a small vase on the windowsill with dried wildflowers. Someone had cared enough to place them there. She had not let herself hope in weeks. Downstairs, she heard the soft creak of Landon's boots as he moved through the kitchen. Gentle, steady. She thought about what he had said, that her and her children were everything he ever wanted. It made something ache in her chest. The next morning, Theodora rose early. She found the kitchen already warm, coffee on the stove, and Landon outside chopping wood. She tied her hair back and stepped out to meet him. I can do that, she said, reaching for the axe. He paused, sweat darkening his shirt. You do not have to. I want to. He handed it over and watched her split a log clean through. You sure you never worked a ranch before? She smiled a little. I learn fast. He watched her with something close to admiration. You are tougher than most men I know. She looked up at him, her face open for once. I had to be. He took a step closer. The morning light caught in his eyes, and something passed between them, silent, certain. I am glad you came, he said. She looked down, her voice soft. I think I am too. And for the first time in a long time, Theodora let herself believe in something good. Theodora stood in the doorway of the barn, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, fingers raw from pulling nails out of old siding. The morning had stretched long and quiet, the kind of quiet she hadn't known in months, not empty, but full of breath and work and the sound of someone else hammering nearby. Seth was at the corral, watching the mule from a safe distance while Susanna dozed in the shade of a hay cart, her doll tucked beneath her arm. Landon was near the far wall, sorting through lengths of timber, his shirt clinging to his back. She watched the way he moved, efficient, unhurried, like he wasn't racing time for once. When he caught her eye, he set down a plank and came over, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. You ever done framing? He asked, nodding toward the exposed rafters. No, she said, adjusting her grip on the pry bar. But I can hold steady and follow instruction. He studied her face, then handed her a measuring rod. Then you're already better than most. She climbed the ladder while he braced it. From up there, she could see the hills rolling out beyond the fence line, pale grass swaying under the wind. It was the first time she'd seen that far in weeks without thinking about what she was running from. He passed her a nail pouch. My brother built this barn with me. He left for Oregon 2 winters back. Got married. Raising sheep now. She knocked a nail into place. You miss him. Every fall when the wind shifts. He always said the cold made him feel alive. I think about him then. She paused, her fingers resting on the beam. I think about my husband when the sky turns gray. He used to say storms made him feel useful. She pressed the nail in deeper. He'd go out just to fix things before they broke. Landon didn't fill the silence. He just waited, letting her finish the thought or not. When she climbed down, her palms were blistered, but she didn't wince. He handed her a damp cloth and she took it, wiping the grit from her hands. Your boy? Landon said, glancing toward Seth. He's sharp, Noticed the latch on the corral gate was loose before I did. He watches everything, Theodora said. He stopped talking for a while after we buried his father. Then one day, he asked if God lived in the thunder. Landon looked back at the boy. What did you tell him? She folded the cloth slowly. I said I didn't know. But if he did, he must be tired of the noise too. That evening, after supper was cleared and the children curled near the hearth, Landon brought a small wooden box over to the table. His hands were quiet as he worked the latch open, revealing 2 folded letters and a worn harmonica. I found this in my father's chest after he passed, he said. He used to play in the evenings when we were young. Said it kept the wolves from the door. Theodora tilted her head. Did it? Some nights. Others. It just gave us something to listen to while we waited for the dark to pass. He handed her the harmonica. She turned it over in her hands, the metal cool and smooth, the wood worn down where fingers had gripped it often. I can't play, she said. Neither can I, he admitted. But I try anyway. She smiled then, not wide but real. The wind outside picked up, brushing against the house like a stray animal looking for shelter. Inside, the air held the warmth of soup and the soft creak of settling timber. Landon leaned back, watching the flames flicker, his boots crossed at the ankle. Theodora shifted in her chair, her shoulders no longer drawn tight. You think you'll stay? He asked, not looking directly at her. She didn't answer right away. She reached down, tucking Susanna's blanket up around her chin, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's brow. I think I'd like to, she said quietly. If there's still room. He didn't move, but something in his posture changed like a gate unlatched, swinging open just enough. There's room, he said. Always was. By late September, the mornings came edged in frost and the cottonwoods behind the barn turned the color of brass. Theodora rose before the sun, wrapped Susanna in a shawl, and sent Seth out with Landon to check the traps near the creek. The boy had taken to the work like it was something he'd been waiting for all his life, eyes alert, feet sure, asking questions that Landon answered like he'd been waiting to be asked. Inside the house, Theodora stirred cornmeal into a pot over the stove, her movements slow, thoughtful. The air smelled of smoke and early apples. She glanced toward the window where the first light was touching the hills. She still woke each day expecting it all to be gone, the roof, the quiet, the man who had opened his door without asking for anything in return. When footsteps sounded on the porch, she turned. Landon came in first, his hands raw from the cold, Seth close behind carrying a small canvas sack. 2 rabbits and a hen pheasant, Seth said, holding the bundle like it was gold. We'll have stew tonight. Theodora nodded. Good work, she said, brushing his hair back. Leave them in the wash basin. I'll clean them after breakfast. Landon hung his coat by the door, his breath still clouding in the air. You staying in today? Weather's turning. I was hoping to walk to the ridge, she said, wiping her hands. I saw rosehips along the slope last week. If I can gather enough, I might put up jars before the first snow. His brow lifted. You know how to do preserves? I grew up on a tenant farm outside Topeka. If you didn't learn to stretch the harvest, you didn't last through winter. You'll need someone to carry the sack, he said, glancing toward Seth. He's got schoolwork. I can manage, she said, but her voice didn't hold resistance. I'll come, he said simply. By mid-morning they were walking the ridge quietly, the grass brittle beneath their boots, the sky high and pale. Theodora's skirt snagged on thistles as she reached into the brush, plucking the small red berries and dropping them into a muslin sack. Landon moved beside her, clearing low branches, watching the slope for snakes. You always this quiet? She asked, not looking up. He slid a branch out of her way. Seems to me most folks talk too much. And what about you? I like to listen first. She crouched again, tugging at a stubborn stem. I'm still learning how to live in silence. It used to scare me. He crouched beside her. And now, she glanced at him. Now it feels honest. They worked in rhythm after that, neither needing to fill the space. When the sack was nearly full, she stood and stretched her back, hands on her hips. You always planned on staying put? She asked. I thought I'd leave, he said. When my brother went west, I packed a saddlebag. But then the calf season came early, and the fence line washed out from the spring melt. By the time I looked up, another year had passed. She smiled faintly. Life has a way of deciding for you. He picked up the sack, slinging it over his shoulder. Not always. Sometimes you get to decide for it. They turned back toward the house. The clouds above the mountains had thickened, and the light had tilted toward late afternoon. As they reached the edge of the field, Theodora paused and looked out across the land, the barn, the smoke rising from the chimney, the sound of Susanna's voice drifting faintly from the porch. I never thought I'd find rest again, she said, barely above a whisper. Landon turned, his eyes steady on her. You didn't find it. You made it. She met his gaze. I don't know what this is yet, she said, voice thin with the weight of truth. But it's the first thing that doesn't feel borrowed. He stepped closer, the sack still slung on his back, his brow lined with sun and wind. Then let's keep building it, day by day. She nodded once, slow and sure. Yes, day by day. And they walked the last stretch home together, side by side, the ground beneath them firm. By the last week of October, the wind had changed. It came stronger through the valley, dry and sharp, rattling the window panes and carrying the scent of pine bark and turning soil. Theodora stood in the yard just after midday, her apron dusted with flour, hands on her hips as she watched Seth help Landon hang the last of the storm shutters. Susanna sat cross-legged near the porch steps, stringing the last of the corn husk dolls Theodora had shown her how to make from the harvest leavings. You'll want to check the north trough before first snow, she said, her voice calm but certain. Landon stepped off the ladder and looked over his shoulder. Why's that? She nodded toward the slope above the spring. That runoff from the ridge collects in the bend. If it freezes before the overflow drains, it'll crack the basin. He studied her for a beat, then gave a slow nod. I'll take a spade up tonight. You've a good eye for water. My father tended irrigation ditches, she said. You learn to read ground like you'd read a ledger. Landon brushed his hands on his trousers and turned to Seth. Go fetch the short-handled shovel from the barn, would you? The boy nodded and jogged off, boots kicking up dry leaves along the way. Theodora stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair away from her forehead with the back of her wrist. You've been letting him do more each week, she said. He takes to it like a colt to the bit, Landon answered. But I don't want him skipping over his boyhood chasing a man's weight. She studied his face. He won't, not with you watching. He tilted his head slightly. And you? She drew a breath, thoughtful. I'm still learning what it means to be safe in the same place long enough to rest. They walked back toward the porch together. Susanna looked up and held out her doll, the husk hair tied with a strip of blue calico. I made this one for Mr. Hale, she said. He crouched beside her, taking the little figure in both hands. She's got strong shoulders, he said. Must be a ranch boss. The girl grinned. She keeps everybody warm. He looked over at Theodora. Smart doll. Later that night, after the children had gone to sleep, Theodora lingered by the hearth, folding the mended sleeves of Landon's work shirt. The stitching was uneven in places but solid. The fire cracked gently, casting long shadows across the floorboards. Landon came in from the barn, his shoulders dusted with wood shavings, fingers stained from grease and ash. He hung his coat by the door and sat across from her, the quiet wrapping around them like a second blanket. "I found one of your books in the top drawer of the bureau," he said. "The one with the pressed ferns." She didn't look up from her folding. "I used to keep a journal before the children. That book was the last one I didn't sell." "You wrote in it?" "Sometimes. Other times, I just needed a place to put things I didn't want to forget." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You think you'll write again?" She looked at him, then into the stillness he carried. "I might, if the nights keep being this quiet." He nodded, then glanced down at his hands. "I've been thinking about building a second coop. If we get hens through the winter, we could sell eggs come spring." "That's good sense," she said. "You'd need more feed, though. I'd need help balancing the books." She raised an eyebrow. "You offering me a job?" He met her gaze. "I'm offering you something steadier than that." She didn't answer right away. The fire popped, and somewhere beyond the house, an owl called once, low and distant. "I don't want to be something you feel obliged to fix," she said quietly. "You're not," he said. "You're someone I want to build with. No mending. No fixing. Just starting." She folded the last shirt and set it on the stack. Her voice was steady. "I've never been courted." He smiled gently. "Then I'll take my time." She stood and walked past him, pausing only once to lay her hand softly on his shoulder. He didn't move, just watched her fingers rest there like they'd always belonged. Behind her, the fire burned low, but steady. The first snow came early that year, brushing the tops of the pines with pale dust that clung to the branches like breath on glass. Theodora pressed her palm to the window pane and watched the flakes drift down in slow, spiraling turns. Behind her, the kettle on the stove hissed softly, and the scent of steeping sage filled the room. Susanna was seated at the table, tongue between her teeth as she traced letters onto a slate, her brow furrowed in concentration. Seth sat on the floor nearby, carving a length of birchwood into something long and slim. He didn't say what it was yet. He'd taken to shaping things lately, quiet things with purpose. Landon had gone out before dawn to check the far pasture. Theodora had packed him a square of cornbread and a jar of boiled coffee wrapped in a cloth. He hadn't kissed her hand before leaving, but he had brushed her shoulder when he passed, and that touch had settled into her skin like warmth from the hearth. When the door opened and the wind curled through the kitchen, she turned with a towel still in her hand. Landon stepped inside, snow dusting his hair and shoulders, the scent of cold and pine clinging to his coat. "There's a cow down near the willow bend," he said, pulling off his gloves. "She's not dead, but she's favoring her leg. Might have slipped on the slope." Theodora moved to the cupboard, pulling out the small tin of willow bark tincture she'd brewed 2 weeks past. "You'll need to splint it if it's not broken clean. She might mend." He took the bottle, nodding. "I'll wrap her tight and leave her in the lower stall. She's calm, no bellowing." She opened the stove door and added a fresh log. "You'll want to check her gut, too. She might have stopped chewing." He paused, then looked at her. "You know you could be a rancher in your own right. I'm not looking to be anything alone anymore." He didn't answer, but the way he looked at her then made her throat tighten. That evening, after supper was cleared and the shutters drawn against the thickening snow, Landon stood by the fire, running his thumb along the carved edge of a small wooden box. Seth handed it to him, eyes eager but steady. "It's for her," Seth said. "I made it from the birch near the creek. The one with the storm scar." Landon nodded. "It's strong wood. She'll know that." Theodora was in the bedroom, folding linens, when Seth came to fetch her. She followed him into the parlor, brushing flour from her apron, her brow creased. Landon turned to her and held out the box. Seth carved it. I lined it. She took it in both hands and opened the lid. Inside, nestled in cloth, was a ring of braided horsehair, dark and burnished, bound by a strip of copper at the seam. I don't have gold, Landon said, but I've had that braid since I broke my first colt. It's held through every season. Thought maybe it could hold us, too. She looked down at the ring, then back at him. You're asking. I am. She ran her thumb over the braid. I never thought I'd say yes again. He stepped closer, his voice low. Then don't say yes to again. Say yes to now. She met his eyes and nodded. Yes to now. He slid the ring onto her finger, to fit without strain. Later, after the children had been tucked in and the wind had settled to a hush outside the eaves, Theodora stood at the edge of the bed and unpinned her hair. Landon sat on the edge of the mattress, watching her with quiet reverence. You know, she said, fingers combing through the loosened strands, I used to dream about a kitchen with windows that faced east. Somewhere the sun came in early. He tilted his head. You thinking of building on? I think I'm done thinking small. He reached out, took her hand, and kissed the inside of her wrist. Then let's build it. She climbed in beside him, the weight of winter pressing gentle against the walls, but not inside. Inside, there was warmth and breath and the slow unfolding of something neither of them had dared name before. They didn't speak much after that. They didn't need to. By spring, the new hens were laying. Susanna planted wildflowers in a row beside the porch, and Seth built her a fence from leftover posts. Landon ordered lumber from Missoula and started on the east-facing kitchen. Theodora taught him how to dry herbs in bundles over the stove. He taught her how to notch fence rails without splitting them. They were married beneath the cottonwoods, just before the leaves unfurled. The ring stayed on her finger through calving, sickness, and the long summer rains. It stayed through laughter and long days and nights when neither of them slept, just listened to the wind move outside and knew they were safe. And in the warmth of that house, with windows that caught the morning sun, love settled in like it had always meant to be there. Not hurried, not borrowed, just theirs.